The planet loomed before them, a massive, shadowed sphere suspended in the void of space. Its surface was a patchwork of deep scars and jagged mountain ranges, a world marked by time and turmoil. The ancient planet had been a source of speculation and fear for as long as the galaxy's oldest records could trace. Its true name had been lost to the ages, replaced by countless monikers across different civilizations, each with its own tale of dread and mystery. Yet, despite the legends that shrouded it, no living being had set foot on its surface in eons, until now. Aboard the sleek vessel, a group of elite alien scholars prepared themselves for the descent. They were a diverse assembly, representing some of the galaxy's most advanced species, each chosen for their unparalleled expertise. Despite their varied origins, they shared a singular purpose: to uncover the secrets that had kept this planet isolated and feared for millennia. Leading the expedition was Dr. Zura, a towering figure among the scholars, both literally and figuratively. A member of the Sarthak, a species known for their massive stature and intellectual prowess, Zura was revered as one of the foremost minds in the field of ancient civilizations. His 4 eyes, each capable of independent movement, scanned the data on his holoscreen, a faint glow illuminating the deep blue of his skin. Despite his calm exterior, the weight of the mission bore heavily on his shoulders. The planet had been an enigma that defied the understanding of even the greatest scholars. To unlock its secrets would be the pinnacle of his career or his undoing. Beside him, Dr. Lyali adjusted the intricate apparatus that connected her to the ship's sensor array. A being of pure energy encased in a translucent shell, she belonged to the Lumari, a species whose physical forms were as fluid and ethereal as their thoughts. Her presence brought an almost tangible warmth to the otherwise sterile atmosphere of the ship's command center. Lyali's expertise lay in deciphering the quantum signatures of ancient artifacts, a skill that had earned her a place on this perilous journey. Her energy pulsed in a rhythmic glow, betraying a rare hint of excitement beneath her composed demeanor. Further back in the room, crouched over a console, was Dr. Vokhtel, a member of the Grak. His species, renowned for their unmatched technical ingenuity, had been responsible for constructing the intricate machinery that would allow them to explore the planet's surface. Vokhtel's 6 appendages moved with precision as he conducted a final check on the systems. His multifaceted eyes reflected the array of holographic displays, each feeding him data that would have overwhelmed a lesser mind. Vokhtel had spent his life in pursuit of knowledge, driven by an insatiable curiosity that often bordered on obsession. For him, this mission was a chance to unlock the ultimate puzzle. The ship's descent was smooth, the only sound a low hum that reverberated through the vessel as it breached the planet's atmosphere. The surface came into view, a desolate landscape bathed in the eerie light of a distant sun. The ground below was a mix of cracked stone and fine dust, the remnants of an environment that had long since succumbed to the ravages of time. The scholars felt the gravity of the moment as their vessel touched down with a soft thud, sending up a cloud of ancient dust. Exiting the ship, they were immediately struck by the silence. It was a silence so profound that it seemed to swallow even their thoughts. The air was thick, almost oppressive, and it carried a faint metallic tang that set their senses on edge. Despite the planet's inhospitable nature, there was something oddly familiar about it, as if they had seen this place before in dreams or visions. Dr. Zura led the way, his heavy footsteps leaving deep impressions in the dust. They approached a series of towering structures that jutted out from the landscape like the bones of a long-dead creature. These monoliths were covered in intricate carvings and symbols, the meanings of which eluded them. Zura ran a hand over the surface of one of the structures, feeling the grooves worn smooth by untold eons. "These carvings," Zura began, his voice resonating through the still air, "they resemble something from our oldest records, yet they're different. I can't place them." Dr. Lavely floated closer, her energy fluctuating as she scanned the structure. "There's a quantum signature here, but it's layered. It's as if multiple timelines are converging on this spot, overlapping but not quite merging. I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Vokhtel joined them, his appendages tapping against the monolith as he analyzed its composition. The material is unlike anything we've encountered. It's both ancient and advanced, a paradox in itself. It's as if this structure exists outside of our understanding of time and space. They continued their exploration, moving from structure to structure, each discovery adding to the growing sense of unease. The architecture was familiar in its symmetry and design, yet there was an underlying strangeness that defied categorization. The scholars documented everything meticulously, aware that they were standing on the precipice of a discovery that could reshape their understanding of the universe. As they delved deeper into the ruins, they came upon a large, open plaza, at the center of which stood a massive obelisk. The obelisk was adorned with more carvings, but these were different from the ones they had seen before. These symbols seemed to depict a story, a chronicle of events long past. The scholars gathered around it, their collective minds working to decipher the ancient script. "This tells of a great exodus," Zura said, tracing the symbols with his hand. "A migration of a species from this planet to the stars. But there's something else. It speaks of a transformation, a change that occurred after they left. They evolved, adapted to new worlds, and in doing so, they lost something fundamental." Dr. Lyely's energy dimmed slightly as she processed the information. Could it be that this species, spread across the galaxy, their genetic material influencing the evolution of countless other species? It would explain the similarities we've found in our DNA. Voktal's appendages twitched with excitement. If that's true, then we're all descendants of this one ancient species. But what happened to them? Why did they leave this world? As if in response to his question, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The scholars exchanged nervous glances as the tremors grew stronger, causing dust and debris to rain down from the ruins. The obelisk emitted a low hum, its symbols glowing faintly as the planet seemed to awaken from its long slumber. "Something is happening," Zura said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "We need to understand what we've uncovered here before it's too late." The scholars hurriedly continued their investigation, their minds racing to piece together the fragments of the story that lay before them. The symbols on the obelisk told of a catastrophe, a cosmic event that had forced the ancient species to flee their homeworld. But there was something more, a final, cryptic message that none of them could decipher. As the tremors subsided, the scholars stood in silence, contemplating the enormity of their discovery. They had come seeking knowledge, but what they had found was a mystery that transcended their understanding. The planet, once feared and forgotten, had revealed its secrets, yet those secrets only served to deepen the enigma. For the first time, the scholars felt the weight of history bearing down on them. This was no longer just an academic pursuit. It was a quest to uncover the truth of their origins, a truth that had been hidden for eons. The eerie silence of the planet returned, but now it was filled with a new tension, a sense that they had only just begun to scratch the surface of a much larger, more profound mystery. They stood in the shadow of the obelisk, each lost in their thoughts. The structures around them, once merely ancient relics, now felt alive with purpose. The familiar yet alien symbols seemed to pulse with a meaning just out of reach, a language that spoke not only to the mind, but to something deeper, something primal. The scholars knew they could not leave this planet until they had uncovered the full story. They were bound to it now, tied by the threads of discovery and destiny. The ancient planet had called out to them, and they had answered. What they would find in the depths of its ruins, in the layers of its history, would challenge everything they knew about themselves and their place in the galaxy. But for now, they could only press on, each step taking them closer to the truth, and further into the heart of the mystery that had drawn them here. The planet remained silent, its secrets guarded, waiting for the moment when they would be revealed. The tremors had subsided, leaving the scholars in a tense silence as they stared at the towering obelisk. The symbols etched into its surface seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, as if beckoning them to uncover their secrets. It was a moment heavy with significance, yet there was no time to dwell on the enormity of their discovery. The ground beneath them had settled, but their minds were in turmoil, struggling to piece together the puzzle that lay before them. Dr. Zura was the first to break the silence. "We need to dig deeper, both literally and metaphorically. This obelisk is a signpost, a marker of something far more significant buried beneath. The others nodded in agreement. Dr. Lyell's energy pulsed rhythmically, reflecting her growing unease. The quantum signatures we've detected are stronger in this area. Whatever is hidden here, it's connected to the fabric of time itself. Vachtel's appendages twitched with anticipation. We have the equipment. If there's something beneath us, we'll find it. I'll begin the scans. As Vachtel set to work, deploying a series of advanced sensors into the ground, the rest of the team gathered around the obelisk. Dr. Zura couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of a discovery that would challenge everything they knew. The carvings, the architecture, the strange familiarity of the place, it all pointed to a connection that transcended their understanding of history. Minutes passed as the scans penetrated the earth, mapping the subterranean layers with precision. The scholars watched the data feeds with bated breath, their minds racing with possibilities. Then, the display lit up with a series of readings that defied explanation. "There's a chamber below us," Vachtel announced, his voice tinged with excitement. "It's vast, and there's something else. Organic material, ancient, but preserved." Lyell's light flickered. How could anything organic survive for so long? This planet has been abandoned for eons. "We're about to find out," Zura said, his tone steady but his heart pounding. "Prepare the excavation equipment. We need to access that chamber." The process was meticulous, every movement calculated to avoid damaging whatever lay beneath. As the hours passed, the scholars worked in silence, their minds focused on the task at hand. The obelisk stood as a silent sentinel, its glowing symbols casting an eerie light over the scene. Finally, the ground gave way, revealing a narrow passage that descended into darkness. The scholars exchanged glances, a mixture of apprehension and determination in their eyes. Zura took the lead, his massive form squeezing through the opening as he activated his suit's built-in light. The passage was narrow, forcing them to move single file as they descended deeper into the planet's crust. The walls were lined with more carvings, the symbols growing more intricate and complex the further they went. The air was thick with the scent of ancient dust and something else, something that felt alive, despite the eons that had passed. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened up into a vast chamber. The scholars stepped forward, their lights cutting through the darkness to reveal a sight that left them speechless. The chamber was filled with rows upon rows of what appeared to be stasis pods, each one encased in a translucent material that glowed faintly with an inner light. The pods were ancient, their surfaces etched with the same symbols they had seen above, but their contents were still intact. Inside each pod lay a figure, humanoid in shape, but unlike any species they had encountered. Lyell's light dimmed as she scanned the pods, her voice barely above a whisper. This is beyond anything we've ever seen. These beings, they're all from the same species, but they're different." Zura approached one of the pods, his eyes narrowing as he examined the figure inside. The being was tall, with elongated limbs and a face that was both alien and strangely familiar. Its features were sharp, its eyes closed in what seemed to be a deep sleep. But what caught his attention was the subtle similarity to the scholars themselves, the shape of the skull, the structure of the hands. Vachtel was already at work, his appendages a blur as he began analyzing the genetic material preserved within the pods. The others watched in silence as the data streamed onto their holoscreens, revealing a truth that sent shockwaves through their minds. The DNA, Vachtel's voice was barely a whisper. "It's almost identical to ours. There are variations, but it's as if these beings were a common ancestor to every species we know." Lyell's energy flared briefly, a sign of her shock. "How is that possible? Evolution doesn't work like this. Species diverge over time, they don't converge." Zura's mind raced as he processed the implications. Unless they were the original species, the progenitors, if they spread across the galaxy, adapting to different environments, their descendants could have evolved into the species we see today. The chamber seemed to hum with an energy that matched their growing realization. The scholars had uncovered something that defied the very laws of biology and evolution. The beings in the pods were not just remnants of a lost civilization, they were the root from which all known life had sprung. As they continued to analyze the data, a sense of awe and fear settled over them. The implications of their discovery were staggering. If this ancient species was indeed the progenitor of all life in the galaxy, then their understanding of their own origins was fundamentally flawed. Lyali floated closer to Zura, her energy pulsing with a mixture of curiosity and concern. What do we do with this knowledge? If we reveal this to the galaxy, it could change everything: our history, our identity. Zura's gaze remained fixed on the figure inside the pod. We need to understand more. There has to be a reason why this planet was abandoned, why these beings were left in stasis. Perhaps they knew something that we're only beginning to grasp. Voktal, still engrossed in his analysis, suddenly paused. There's something else. The genetic material, it's not just a match for us. It's been altered. There are traces of manipulation, as if someone or something was trying to guide the evolution of these beings. The revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud, darkening the mood of the chamber. The scholars had thought they were uncovering the past, but now it seemed they were unearthing something far more complex: a history of interference, of guided evolution that had shaped the very fabric of life itself. As the gravity of the situation sank in, a soft hum filled the chamber, growing in intensity until it resonated through the walls. The scholars looked around in alarm as the stasis pods began to glow brighter, the figures inside stirring as if awakening from a long slumber. Lyali's light flared in panic. The pods are activating. We need to get out of here. But before they could react, the chamber was flooded with light, blinding them as the figures within the pods began to move. The scholars could only watch in stunned silence as the beings opened their eyes, their gaze locking onto the intruders with an intelligence that was both ancient and terrifying. Zura's voice cut through the chaos, his tone steady despite the fear gripping his heart. Stay calm. We don't know their intentions. But as the beings began to emerge from their pods, their movements deliberate and coordinated, it became clear that these were no ordinary creatures. They were the architects of a forgotten past, the progenitors of all life in the galaxy, and now they were awake. The scholars had come seeking knowledge, but what they had found was a force that had shaped the galaxy itself, a force that was now free to continue its work. As the beings stepped forward, their eyes glowing with a light that seemed to pierce through the very souls of the scholars, one thing was certain: the universe would never be the same again. The chamber's sudden illumination cast sharp shadows across the scholars' faces, highlighting the raw tension as they confronted the awakened beings. Each scholar stood frozen, the gravity of their situation sinking in as the figures emerged from their stasis pods, moving with a grace that belied the eons they had spent dormant. The beings, though similar in form to the scholars, possessed an aura of ancient authority. Their elongated limbs and sharp features were marked with symbols that glowed faintly, echoing the inscriptions on the obelisk above. Their eyes, now fully open, shone with a light that was not merely a reflection of their surroundings, but seemed to emanate from within, revealing a depth of knowledge and experience that spanned the ages. Dr. Zura was the first to find his voice, though it was barely more than a whisper. They were waiting for something or someone. The lead figure, taller than the rest and adorned with what appeared to be ceremonial markings, stepped forward, its gaze locking onto Zura. There was an unspoken understanding, a communication that transcended words. The being's eyes bore into Zura's, and in that moment, he felt as if his entire existence was being scrutinized, weighed, and measured. Before he could react, the figure raised a slender hand, palm outward, and the chamber filled with a resonant hum. The other beings mirrored the gesture, and the scholars felt a strange sensation like a gentle pull at the edges of their consciousness. It was not painful, but it was deeply unsettling, as if their minds were being gently but firmly opened and examined. Voktal's appendages twitched as he tried to resist the sensation, but it was futile. They're accessing our thoughts. Lyali, her energy pulsing erratically, struggled to maintain her composure. "What do they want from us?" The lead figure lowered its hand, and the hum subsided, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Then, it spoke not in a language, but in a series of images and emotions that flooded the scholars' minds, bypassing the need for words. They saw flashes of ancient worlds, civilizations rising and falling, and a singular image that lingered: a planet, blue and vibrant, teeming with life. Earth. The image of Earth was clear and distinct, but it was different from what the scholars knew. The continents were familiar, yet the planet seemed more alive, more connected. They saw humans primitive, yet powerful in their own right, spreading across the stars, seeding life in countless forms, their DNA the foundation upon which countless species had been built. As the vision faded, Zura felt a deep, primal connection to the image, as if it resonated with something buried deep within his own genetic memory. The realization hit him with a force that left him breathless. These beings were not just ancestors, they were the creators, the originators of all life in the galaxy. But there was more. The vision continued, showing the rise of different species, each evolving from the same source, each adapting to their environments but retaining a core element of their human origin. The beings had guided this evolution, shaping the galaxy in their image, ensuring that life continued to thrive, but always with a purpose, a grand design that was only now becoming clear. The lead figure spoke again, this time with a single, clear thought that echoed in the minds of the scholars. "We are the architects. You are our legacy." The words sent a shiver down Zura's spine. The implications were staggering. The scholars had come to this planet seeking knowledge, but what they had found was beyond anything they could have imagined. The beings before them had not only created life, they had designed it, manipulated it, ensuring that their essence was preserved across countless generations and species. Voktal, ever the pragmatist, broke the silence with a question that hung heavily in the air. "Why reveal this now? Why wake after so long?" The architect regarded Voktal with a look that was almost compassionate. "The time of separation is ending. The galaxy must unite under one origin, one purpose. The cycle is complete." Layali's energy pulsed as she processed the information. "You mean to say that all life, everything we know, all the species, we're all connected, all derived from the same source?" The architect nodded slowly, a gesture that seemed almost human in its simplicity. "Yes, the galaxy is a reflection of our design, and now it must return to its origin." Zura's thoughts raced. "But what does that mean? What happens now?" The architect's gaze shifted, and the scholars felt a wave of emotions wash over them: sadness, determination, and an underlying sense of inevitability. "Now, we guide you once more. The galaxy must be prepared for the next phase of existence. But it will not be easy. There will be resistance, as there always is when truth challenges belief." The chamber seemed to darken, the weight of the architect's words pressing down on the scholars. They had uncovered a secret that would shake the foundations of everything they knew. The implications were vast, touching every corner of the galaxy, every species, every civilization. But before they could contemplate the full extent of what they had learned, the ground beneath them began to tremble once more. The architects stepped back, their forms beginning to blur and fade, as if they were returning to the state of dormancy from which they had awakened. Voktal's appendages twitched nervously. "What's happening?" The lead architect's voice echoed in their minds one last time, filled with a calm that belied the urgency of the situation. "The planet is resetting. We must return to our slumber, but you have the knowledge now. Use it wisely. The fate of the galaxy rests in your hands." With those final words, the architects vanished, leaving the scholars alone in the chamber. The tremors intensified, and the walls began to close in, the passage they had entered through sealing itself shut. Zura's instincts kicked in. "We need to get out of here, now." The scholars turned and raced back the way they had come, the chamber collapsing behind them. The symbols on the walls pulsed with a dying light, as the planet itself seemed to mourn the loss of the knowledge it had guarded for so long. They barely made it to the surface as the passage sealed completely, the obelisk above now dormant, its glow extinguished. The ground was stable once more, but the scholars knew that the planet's secrets had been buried again, perhaps for another eternity. As they stood in the eerie silence of the planet's surface, catching their breath, the weight of what they had learned settled over them like a shroud. They had come seeking answers, and they had found them along with a responsibility that none of them had anticipated. Laeli was the first to speak, her voice trembling with the enormity of their discovery. "We have to tell the others. The galaxy needs to know the truth." Zura nodded, though his mind was already racing ahead, contemplating the consequences. "Yes, but we must be careful. This knowledge could unite the galaxy, or it could tear it apart. We need to be sure of our next steps." Voxel's appendages twitched nervously. "And what if others don't believe us? What if this truth is too much for them to accept?" Zura looked out at the horizon, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to break. "Then we'll have to make them believe. The galaxy deserves to know where it came from and what it's meant to become." The alien scholars sat in the dimly lit research chamber aboard their spacecraft, each lost in their thoughts, eyes fixed on the ancient text that glowed softly on the screens before them. The weight of their discovery had left the air thick with tension, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. They had uncovered something that challenged everything they knew, something that seemed almost too vast to comprehend, the possibility that every species in the galaxy had evolved from a single, highly advanced progenitor species, humans. Dr. Zura stared at the symbols on the screen, trying to make sense of the complex patterns and the intricate language that had taken them weeks to decipher. The texts were unlike anything they had encountered before, ancient, yet astonishingly detailed, as if the authors had known that one day someone would uncover their secrets. But the idea that these texts, buried for eons, could be linked to a species as primitive and long forgotten as humans was almost too much to believe. "Are we sure about this?" Laeli finally broke the silence, her voice tinged with a mix of disbelief and fear. "Is there no mistake? Could the data be corrupted?" Dr. Zura shook his head slowly. "We've triple-checked everything. The genetic sequences match. The language, the symbols, it's all consistent. The texts are clear. All known species share a common ancestor, and that ancestor appears to be human." Voxel, his appendages twitching in agitation, leaned forward. "But humans? They were thought to be nothing more than a myth, a primitive species that never even left their home planet. How could they possibly be the progenitors of all life in the galaxy?" Zura sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose as he tried to collect his thoughts. "That's what we're trying to figure out. The text suggests that humans were far more advanced than we ever imagined. They had technology and knowledge that allowed them to shape the very fabric of life itself. But something happened, something catastrophic that erased their civilization from existence, leaving only traces behind." Laeli's energy pulsed with unease. "And those traces, they became us? All of us? Every species in the galaxy?" "It seems so," Zura replied, his voice heavy with the enormity of the revelation. "But the texts also imply that this was not an accident. The humans may have deliberately spread their genetic material across the cosmos, seeding life on countless worlds. They were, in a sense, the architects of the galaxy as we know it." Voxel's appendages curled tightly as he struggled to process the information. "But why? Why would they do that? And why would they allow themselves to disappear?" "That's what we need to understand," Zura said, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the ancient symbols on the screen. "The texts hint at a purpose, a reason behind their actions, but the details are still unclear. We need to decode more, to dig deeper into the history they left behind." Laeli nodded slowly, her energy stabilizing as she considered the implications. "If this is true, then everything we know about our history, our origins, it's all wrong. And if the rest of the galaxy finds out about this..." Zura finished her thought, his voice grim. "It could change everything. Political alliances, religious beliefs, the very foundation of our societies. There will be those who accept this truth, and those who will fight it with everything they have. The galaxy could be thrown into chaos." The team fell into a heavy silence once more, the magnitude of their discovery weighing down on them like a crushing force. They had set out on this mission to uncover the mysteries of a forgotten planet, but what they had found was a revelation that threatened to upend everything they knew. After a long pause, Zura spoke again, his voice tinged with determination. "We need to proceed carefully. We must continue our research, but we cannot allow this information to spread until we fully understand it. The galaxy isn't ready for this revelation." Vaktal nodded in agreement, though his appendages still twitched with unease. "But what if someone else discovers it? We're not the only ones searching for answers." "Then we must be the first to understand it," Zura replied firmly. "We need to learn everything we can about the humans, about their technology, their purpose. Only then can we decide what to do with this knowledge." Layali looked at Zura, her gaze intense. "And if the truth is too dangerous, what if it could destroy everything we've built?" Zura's expression hardened. "Then we'll have to make a choice: protect the galaxy from a truth it can't handle, or risk everything in the pursuit of knowledge." The ship's laboratory had become a second home to the scholars. Every surface was covered with data tablets, fragments of decoded text, and complex diagrams that mapped the genetic similarities between the various species of the galaxy. The atmosphere was tense as the team worked around the clock, trying to piece together the puzzle of humanity's lost history. Dr. Zura stood over a holographic display, manipulating the images with deft movements of his hands. The display showed a 3D model of DNA sequences from several different species, each one connected by a glowing thread to a central helix human DNA. The similarities were striking, the variations minor, almost as if the other species had been derived from the human template, with slight modifications for different environments. "It's all here," Zura muttered to himself, his eyes scanning the data. "Every species we've analyzed traces back to the same genetic code. The differences are just mutations that occurred over millennia, but the core remains human." Lagali floated beside him, her energy pulsing with a mix of awe and fear. "It's like a tree with a single root, branching out into countless forms, but the root is always the same." Zura nodded, his mind racing with the implications. The humans were not just another species. They were the first, the foundation upon which all other life was built, and they must have known it. They must have had a reason for spreading their DNA across the galaxy. Vaktal approached, his appendages curled in thought. But why would they do it? What could possibly motivate a species to spread its own genetic material so far and wide? Zura turned to face Vaktal, his expression serious. "That's the question we need to answer. The texts we've decoded suggest that the humans saw themselves as more than just a species. They saw themselves as creators, architects of life. But their purpose, their end goal, is still unclear." Layali's energy dimmed slightly, a sign of her deep contemplation. Could it have been a form of immortality? By seeding life across the galaxy, they ensured that a part of them would live on, even if their civilization fell. "Perhaps," Zura mused, "but it feels like there's more to it." The text mentioned something called the Great Return, a time when all life would come together again, united under the original form. But what does that mean? Vaktal's appendages twitched in frustration. "We need more information. There must be something we've missed, some clue that can explain this great return." Zura turned back to the holographic display, zooming in on the DNA sequences. "The answer must lie in the genetics. If we can fully decode the human DNA, perhaps we'll understand what they were trying to achieve." Layali floated closer, her energy brightening as an idea struck her. What if the Great Return isn't just symbolic? What if it's a literal return? What if the humans intended for their descendants to eventually evolve back into their original form? Zura's eyes widened as he considered the possibility. A cycle of evolution, with all life converging back to its source. It would mean that the humans saw themselves as the pinnacle of creation, and that everything else was just a step along the way. But that would mean... Vaktal began, his voice trailing off as the realization hit him. That would mean we're all just incomplete versions of the original form. That our entire existence has been leading to a point where we become human again. The room fell silent as the implications of Lyell's theory sank in. If it were true, it would mean that the entire galaxy had been unknowingly following a path laid out by the humans, a path that would eventually lead all species back to their original form. Zura's mind raced as he tried to process the enormity of the idea. If that's the case, then the Great Return could be imminent. We could be on the verge of a new phase of evolution, one that brings all species back to their human origins. Lyell's energy pulsed with a mixture of excitement and fear. But what happens to us then? Do we lose what makes us unique? What makes us who we are? Vakto's appendages twitched nervously. And what if not everyone wants to go back? What if there are those who resist this evolution, who want to remain as they are? Zura shook his head slowly. We don't know enough yet. We need to keep searching, keep decoding the text. The answers are there, we just have to find them. But as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something monumental, something that could change the fate of the galaxy forever. The ancient texts, the DNA sequences, the cryptic references to the Great Return, it all pointed to a truth that was as terrifying as it was fascinating. The silence in the room was heavy as the gravity of the discovery began to sink in. Dr. Adrian Cade stood at the center, his gaze fixed on the holographic display that showed the DNA sequences, their complex patterns glowing in the dim light. The ancient text, fragments of a lost language, hovered next to them, still partially deciphered, but enough to send chills down his spine. We need to be careful, Dr. Cade finally spoke, his voice steady but laced with concern. This isn't just some ancient relic we're dealing with. This is something far more significant. Dr. Mira Loken, a linguist with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, folded her arms and leaned against the edge of the table. Significant? Try galaxy shattering. We're looking at the blueprint of something that predates any known civilization by millennia. And the references to the Great Return, this could be a clue to what happened to them. Dr. Elias Morrow, the geneticist who had been meticulously analyzing the DNA sequences, glanced up from his console. His eyes were tired, but there was a spark of excitement in them. These sequences, they're not just human. There's something else, something we've never seen before. A hybrid, perhaps? But the compatibility is too perfect. Dr. Cade turned to him, his brow furrowed. Are you saying this DNA could be engineered? Elias nodded slowly. It's a possibility. Whoever or whatever did this had knowledge and technology far beyond anything we can comprehend. If this is a hybrid, it's flawless. There's no sign of the usual markers that indicate genetic manipulation. Mira uncrossed her arms and pushed off the table, pacing the room as she spoke. And the texts, they hint at something more, a return, a rebirth. But of what? Or whom? The question hung in the air, and for a moment no one spoke. The implications were too vast, too overwhelming to grasp all at once. Dr. Cade broke the silence. We need to piece this together, bit by bit. Elias, focus on the DNA. Look for any anomalies, anything that doesn't fit with known human sequences. Mira, keep working on the translation. We need to understand what this Great Return refers to. Mira stopped pacing and looked at Cade, her expression serious. Adrian, we're on the brink of something that could change everything. We need to be ready for whatever we uncover. Cade nodded, his eyes meeting hers. I know, but we need to approach this with caution. If we're right, this isn't just about uncovering the past. This could have serious repercussions for the future. Elias leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The more I look at this, the more I think we're dealing with something beyond our understanding. These sequences, they're too perfect. It's as if they were meant to be found. Mira frowned, her mind racing. Or they were left as a warning. The texts speak of a great return, but what if it's not something to welcome? What if it's something to fear? The room fell into a thoughtful silence as they each processed the possibilities. The air seemed to grow thicker with the weight of their discovery, a discovery that was both thrilling and terrifying. Dr. Cade finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "We need to keep this under wraps until we know more. No one outside this team needs to know about this until we're sure of what we're dealing with." Mira and Elias nodded in agreement. The last thing they needed was a panic, or, worse, someone trying to exploit their findings before they fully understood them. Elias returned to his work, the faint glow of the holographic display reflecting in his eyes. Mira went back to her translations, her fingers flying across the console as she decoded the ancient script. And Cade, the leader of this small but brilliant team, stood in the center of it all, his mind racing with the implications of what they had uncovered. Hours passed as they worked in near silence, each of them absorbed in their tasks. The lab was filled with a soft hum of machinery, the occasional beep of a console, and the rustle of pages as Mira consulted ancient text. Finally, Elias broke the silence. "Adrian, take a look at this." Cade moved over to Elias's station, his eyes narrowing as he studied the display. "What is it?" Elias pointed to a section of the DNA sequence. "This part here, it's a perfect match to modern human DNA. But look at this." He highlighted another section. "This is where it gets strange. These markers don't correspond to anything in our database. It's like nothing we've ever seen." Cade leaned in closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you saying this DNA is from an unknown species?" Elias nodded slowly. "It's possible, and if that's the case, then we're dealing with something far beyond our current understanding of genetics." Mira looked up from her work, her eyes sharp. The text mentioned ancient visitors. Could this be what they were referring to? A species that interbred with early humans? Cade's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. If that's true, then the implications are staggering. This could rewrite our understanding of human history. But we need more evidence before we can draw any conclusions. Mira returned to her translations, her mind whirling with the possibilities. "I'll keep digging. There has to be more in these texts, something that will give us a clearer picture." Elias continued to analyze the DNA sequences, his fingers flying across the console as he compared the unknown markers to the vast database at his disposal. Cade watched him work, his thoughts a whirlwind of excitement and apprehension. Hours passed, and the team worked tirelessly, driven by a mix of curiosity and the weight of their discovery. The room was filled with the soft glow of holographic displays, the faint sound of fingers tapping on consoles, and the occasional murmur of conversation as they shared their findings. Finally, Elias spoke again, his voice filled with awe. "Adrian, I think I've found something." Cade moved over to Elias's station, his heart pounding in his chest. "What is it?" Elias pointed to a section of the DNA sequence. "This marker here, it's almost identical to a sequence found in ancient human DNA. But the differences are subtle, almost imperceptible. It's as if this DNA has been refined." Cade stared at the display, his mind racing. Refined? By whom? Or what? Elias shook his head, his expression filled with a mix of wonder and fear. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's beyond anything we've ever encountered." Mira looked up from her work, her eyes wide. "The text, they speak of a great return. What if this is connected? What if this DNA is part of that return?" Cade's mind reeled as he considered the possibilities. If that's true, then we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. This isn't just about uncovering the past, it's about protecting the future. The room fell into a heavy silence as they each absorbed the gravity of the situation. They were no longer just scholars, no longer just researchers seeking answers to ancient mysteries. They were now the guardians of a truth that could change the fate of the galaxy, a truth that could either save or doom them all. Cade finally broke the silence, his voice calm but resolute. "We need to keep this to ourselves for now. No one outside this team needs to know about this until we're sure of what we're dealing with." Agreed? Mira and Elias nodded in agreement, their expressions serious. The last thing they needed was for this information to fall into the wrong hands, or for the galaxy to learn the truth before they were ready to handle it. The team worked tirelessly through the night, sifting through the vast archive of ancient records they had uncovered. Each document, each fragment of data, added another piece to the puzzle. Dr. Adrian Cade, Dr. Mira Loken, and Dr. Elias Morrow were focused on their respective tasks. Mira's eyes flicked back and forth across the screen as she translated yet another passage from the ancient texts. Her breath caught as she deciphered a particular phrase. "Adrian, Elias, you need to see this," she called out, her voice tight with urgency. Cade and Elias quickly moved to her side, peering at the screen over her shoulder. The text was written in an archaic language, but Mira's translation made the message clear. The cataclysm, when the skies burned and the earth trembled, the decision was made. To preserve our essence, to ensure our survival, we must scatter our seed across the stars. The children of Earth will rise again, though the world that bore them falls to ruin. Cade's brow furrowed as he read the passage. This confirms it. The ancient humans knew their civilization was on the brink of destruction. But instead of resigning themselves to extinction, they took drastic measures to ensure their legacy would live on. Elias, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up, his voice tinged with awe. They must have had the technology to do it. To seed the galaxy with their DNA. It's beyond anything we've ever imagined. Mira shook her head slowly, still absorbing the enormity of the revelation. But what caused their downfall? What was the cataclysm? And why did they choose this path instead of trying to save their world? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the team continued to process the implications of what they had discovered. The room was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the soft hum of the computers and the occasional rustle of paper as they consulted the ancient texts. Cade finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "We need to find out more. There has to be something in these records that explains what happened, why they felt they had no other choice but to disperse their DNA across the galaxy." Mira nodded, her eyes focused on the screen in front of her. "I'll keep looking through the texts. There might be more references to the cataclysm or the events leading up to it." Elias returned to his work, his mind racing with the possibilities. "I'll analyze the genetic data we've gathered so far. If the ancient humans were as advanced as it seems, there might be clues in the DNA itself, markers that could tell us more about what they were trying to achieve." The team worked in near silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts as they delved deeper into the mystery. The hours passed in a blur as they pieced together the fragments of a civilization long gone, a civilization that had been far more advanced than they had ever imagined. As the night wore on, Mira found another passage in the ancient text that sent a chill down her spine. "Adrian, I think I found something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Cade moved to her side, his eyes scanning the screen as she translated the text. "The great choice. To save our children, we must let go of our world. The cataclysm is upon us, and there is no escape. But through our sacrifice, they will live on, scattered among the stars. Our legacy will endure, though we perish." Mira looked up at Cade, her expression filled with a mix of awe and sorrow. They knew they couldn't save themselves, so they chose to save their descendants instead. Cade nodded slowly, his mind racing as he considered the implications of what they had uncovered. They weren't just trying to preserve their DNA, they were ensuring that their legacy would continue, even if it meant the end of their own civilization. Elias, who had been listening from his workstation, spoke up, his voice tinged with admiration. "It's a testament to their resilience. They knew their world was doomed, but they refused to let their essence be extinguished. Instead, they found a way to ensure that their descendants would live on, even if it meant starting over on distant worlds." Mira sighed, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. But at what cost? They lost everything: their world, their culture, their history, and now we're the ones left to piece it all together. Cade placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a small measure of comfort. "We're doing what they couldn't. We're uncovering their story, bringing their legacy back to life. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to learn from their mistakes and avoid the same fate." The room fell into a thoughtful silence as they each reflected on the enormity of what they had discovered. The ancient humans had faced an impossible choice, and they had made a decision that would shape the course of history for millennia to come. But with that knowledge came a heavy burden, a burden that now rested on their shoulders. As they continued their work, the weight of their discovery pressed down on them, a constant reminder of the responsibility they now bore. They were no longer just scholars or researchers, they were the guardians of a truth that could change the fate of the galaxy, just as it had changed the fate of the ancient humans. But as they delved deeper into the records, they began to uncover hints of something even more disturbing. There were references to a force, a malevolent entity that had driven the ancient humans to the brink of extinction. It was referred to only as the enemy, a shadowy figure that loomed over the text like a dark specter. Mira's hands trembled slightly as she translated another passage, her voice barely above a whisper. "The enemy comes, and with it, the end of all things. We cannot defeat it, but we can ensure that our children live on, free from its grasp. They will carry our essence, our knowledge, and one day they will rise again." Cade's expression grew grim as he listened to her words. This changes everything. The ancient humans weren't just facing a natural disaster, they were fighting against something far more dangerous. Elias's voice was filled with dread as he spoke. If the enemy was powerful enough to bring down a civilization as advanced as theirs, what chance do we have if it comes for us? The room was filled with a heavy silence as the team grappled with the implications of this new revelation. The ancient humans had sacrificed everything to protect their descendants from the enemy, but in doing so, they had also unleashed their DNA across the galaxy, potentially drawing the very thing they had feared to new worlds. Cade's mind raced as he considered their options. They had uncovered a truth that could change everything, a truth that could either save the galaxy or doom it. And now, they had to decide what to do with that knowledge. "We need to be careful," Cade finally said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "If the enemy is still out there, we can't let this information fall into the wrong hands. We need to figure out how to protect ourselves, how to protect the galaxy from whatever it is that brought down the ancient humans." Mira nodded in agreement, her expression serious. "But we also need to make sure that the truth isn't lost. We owe it to them, to the ancient humans, to uncover their story, to understand what happened and why." Elias leaned back in his chair, his mind filled with a sense of both awe and dread. "We're on the brink of something monumental, but with that knowledge comes a responsibility to ensure that history doesn't repeat itself." Cade placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "We'll face this together, as a team, and whatever comes next, we'll be ready." Elias nodded, though the worry in his eyes remained. The enormity of their discovery weighed heavily on all of them, but there was no turning back now. They had uncovered a truth that could change everything, and with that knowledge came the responsibility to act. The team resumed their work, each member focused on their tasks with renewed determination. Mira continued to translate the ancient texts, hoping to find more information about the enemy and the events that led to the downfall of the ancient humans. Cade began drafting a report that would summarize their findings, carefully considering how much they could reveal without putting the galaxy at risk. Elias delved deeper into the genetic data, searching for clues that might help them understand what the ancient humans had faced. Hours passed as they worked in silence, the only sounds in the room, the soft tapping of keyboards and the occasional rustle of paper. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the anticipation of what they might discover next. Finally, Mira broke the silence. "I think I found something," she said, her voice low but urgent. Cade and Elias quickly joined her, peering at the screen as she translated the latest passage. "The final battle. The enemy has breached our defenses. We have fought with all our strength, but it is not enough. Our world is lost. But we will not go quietly into the night. We will leave behind a legacy, a spark of hope that will one day ignite the stars." Mira paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she absorbed the meaning of the words. They knew they were going to lose, but even in their final moments, they were thinking about the future. Cade nodded, his expression grim. They didn't just give up. They made a conscious decision to ensure that their knowledge, their essence, would survive, even if they didn't. Elias's voice was tinged with both admiration and sadness. It's incredible, really. They were facing complete annihilation, and yet they still had the presence of mind to think about what came next. They weren't just trying to survive, they were trying to make sure that their legacy would endure. Mira leaned back in her chair, her eyes distant as she considered the implications of what they had uncovered. But what does that mean for us? If the enemy was powerful enough to destroy a civilization as advanced as theirs, how can we hope to stop it if it comes for us? Cade's expression hardened, his resolve clear. We need to learn everything we can about the enemy, what it is, where it came from, and how the ancient humans fought against it. If there's anything in these records that can help us, we need to find it. Elias nodded in agreement. But we also need to be careful about how we use this knowledge. If the enemy is still out there, we don't want to draw its attention to us. Mira's eyes narrowed in thought. Maybe that's why the ancient humans scattered their DNA across the galaxy. They were trying to hide, to spread out their essence so that the enemy wouldn't be able to find them all in one place. Cade considered her words carefully. It's possible, but if that's the case, we need to be even more cautious. We don't know how much time we have, or if the enemy is even aware of our existence. We can't afford to take any unnecessary risks. The team fell silent again, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The discovery they had made was both exhilarating and terrifying. They had uncovered a truth that had been buried for millennia, a truth that could change the fate of the galaxy. But with that knowledge came a responsibility to ensure that they didn't repeat the mistakes of the past. As they continued their work, the weight of their discovery pressed down on them like a heavy shroud. They had uncovered the truth about the ancient humans and the catastrophic event that had led to the dispersion of their genes across the galaxy. But there were still so many unanswered questions that they knew they had to find answers to if they were going to survive. Hours later, Cade leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes as fatigue began to set in. "We should take a break," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "We've been at this for hours. We need to clear our heads if we're going to make any progress." Mira and Elias nodded in agreement, both of them looking equally drained. They had been working non-stop since they had made their discovery, but the strain was starting to show. Cade stood up and stretched, his muscles stiff from hours of sitting. "Let's take a walk, get some fresh air and clear our minds. We can come back to this with fresh eyes." The others agreed, and they left the cramped room, stepping out into the cool night air. The stars above were bright and clear, a stark contrast to the weight of the knowledge they had uncovered. They walked in silence for a while, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The enormity of their discovery still weighed heavily on them, but the fresh air and the quiet of the night helped to clear their minds. Finally, Mira spoke up, her voice soft but filled with determination. "We can't let this knowledge destroy us. The ancient humans made their choice, and now we have to make ours. We need to decide what we're going to do with this information, and how we're going to use it." Cade nodded, his expression serious. "We're standing at a crossroads. The choices we make now will determine the future of not just our civilization, but the entire galaxy. We need to be smart, and we need to be careful. But most of all, we need to be united in our purpose." Elias looked up at the stars, his eyes filled with both hope and fear. "We're not just scholars anymore, we're the keepers of a legacy that has been lost for millennia. And with that comes a responsibility to ensure that the sacrifices of the past weren't in vain." The transport ship descended slowly through the atmosphere of Prime Eridani, the capital planet of the Galactic Federation. Cade, Mira, and Elias stood in the ship's observation deck, watching as the gleaming spires of the city came into view. The city was a symbol of unity, a place where countless species had come together to forge a peaceful future. Now, it was about to become the epicenter of a revelation that could either strengthen that unity or tear it apart. Hard to believe that just a few weeks ago, we were nothing more than scholars chasing theories, Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. Now, we're carrying the weight of the galaxy on our shoulders, Mira added, her gaze fixed on the city below. I'm not sure any of us were prepared for this. Cade didn't respond. His mind was elsewhere, already anticipating the chaos that awaited them. The Galactic Council had called for an emergency session, and representatives from every known civilization were on their way to hear the team's findings. He could only imagine the reactions that their news would provoke. The truth they had uncovered was too monumental to be met with calm acceptance. The ship touched down in the landing bay, and the team was quickly escorted to the council chamber. The grand hall was filled with representatives from across the galaxy, each one a leader of their respective species. The air was thick with tension, an unspoken understanding that the news about to be delivered would change everything. As they entered the chamber, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to them. The council leader, a tall figure with emerald skin and a crown of golden tendrils, stepped forward. "Scholars Cade, Mira, and Elias," she intoned, her voice echoing through the chamber. "You have been summoned here to present your findings. The floor is yours." Cade exchanged a quick glance with his team before stepping forward. "Council members, esteemed representatives," he began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "We have made a discovery on the planet of gods that challenges everything we know about our origins. What we have found is nothing short of a lost history, one that connects all of us in ways we never imagined." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the assembly. "Our research has uncovered evidence that all species in this galaxy may share a common ancestor, a highly advanced civilization that once dominated the cosmos. That civilization was human." A murmur rippled through the crowd, growing louder as representatives turned to one another, their expressions ranging from disbelief to shock. Cade continued, his voice rising to be heard over the growing unrest. "The genetic material we recovered, coupled with the translations of ancient texts, suggests that after the downfall of their civilization, humans seeded the galaxy with their DNA. They did this to ensure the survival of their legacy. In essence, every species represented here today is a descendant of that ancient civilization." The room erupted into chaos. Some representatives shouted in disbelief, while others sat in stunned silence. The murmur had grown into a cacophony of voices, each one grappling with the implications of what they had just heard. The council leader raised a hand, calling for order. It took several minutes for the noise to die down, and when it did, the tension in the room was even more pronounced. "These are extraordinary claims," the leader said, her voice measured but firm. "Do you have evidence to support this?" Mira stepped forward, activating a holographic display that filled the chamber with a detailed map of the galaxy. "We've analyzed the DNA of numerous species across multiple systems," she explained, highlighting key points on the map. "The genetic similarities are undeniable. Each one traces back to a common origin, an origin that aligns with the timeline of the ancient humans we've discovered." The hologram shifted, displaying a series of ancient texts, their meanings translated and displayed alongside the original script. "These texts," Mira continued, "detail the final days of the human civilization. They speak of a great enemy, of a decision made to preserve their essence across the stars. This is the legacy we've all inherited." Another wave of unrest swept through the room, but this time it was tempered by the gravity of the evidence presented. The council leader's eyes narrowed as she considered the implications. "If what you say is true," she said slowly, "then we are all connected by a shared past, one that has been forgotten for millennia. But what does this mean for the present? How do we reconcile this with the identities we've built, the histories we've been taught?" A representative from the Xandar Dominion, a species known for their rigid adherence to tradition, rose to speak. "This is blasphemy," he declared, his voice filled with anger. "Our ancestors have always been unique, blessed by the stars themselves. We will not have our history rewritten by a mere hypothesis." Across the chamber, a representative from the Lycan Confederacy, a species that had long valued exploration and knowledge, stood to counter. "We cannot ignore the evidence," she said, her tone calm but resolute. "If this is true, then it's an opportunity for growth, for unity. We are not just members of isolated species, but part of something much larger. This could be the key to a new era of cooperation." The debate grew more heated, with representatives voicing their concerns, fears, and hopes. Some saw the discovery as a threat to their cultural identities, while others viewed it as a chance to forge stronger bonds across the galaxy. The room became a battleground of ideas, each species grappling with the profound implications of their shared origins. As the arguments continued, Elias couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. The truth they had uncovered was meant to unite, but it was clear that it was also capable of sowing discord. He had always believed that knowledge was a force for good, but now he wondered if some truths were too dangerous to be revealed. Cade stepped back, letting the debate play out. He knew this would be the most difficult part, convincing the galaxy to accept a truth that would upend everything they knew. But he also knew that they had to try. The consequences of keeping this knowledge hidden could be far worse. After what felt like an eternity, the council leader raised her hand once more, silencing the room. "We have heard the arguments," she said, her voice commanding. "But before we make any decisions, I must ask the scholars one final question." She turned to Cade, her gaze piercing. "Do you believe that the ancient humans posed a threat to us? Could their return, or the knowledge of their existence, endanger the stability of the galaxy?" Cade hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on him. He knew that the wrong answer could push the galaxy into chaos, but he also knew that honesty was the only way forward. "We don't believe the ancient humans themselves are a threat," he said carefully. "But the knowledge we've uncovered could be dangerous in the wrong hands. It's possible that the enemy they faced could still be out there, and if that's the case, we need to be prepared. But we also believe that understanding our shared origins could be the key to facing that threat together." The council leader nodded slowly, considering his words. "Thank you for your candor," she said. "We will deliberate on this matter and reconvene in the coming days. Until then, the knowledge you've brought to us will remain classified to prevent unnecessary panic." The team nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. As they were escorted from the chamber, the reality of what they had set in motion began to sink in. They had revealed a truth that could change the galaxy forever, but they had also opened the door to uncertainty and conflict. As they left the council building, the weight of their responsibilities settled on them once more. The galaxy was now aware of its shared origins, but how that knowledge would be used or misused was still to be seen. Back in their quarters, the team sat in silence, the events of the day replaying in their minds. Mira broke the silence, her voice tinged with worry. "Did we do the right thing?" Cade looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We told the truth. That's all we could do. Now it's up to the galaxy to decide what to do with it." Elias nodded in agreement, though his own doubts lingered. "But the truth can be dangerous. We've seen how quickly it can divide. I just hope that we haven't unleashed something we can't control." The silence in the scholars' quarters was heavy, marked only by the soft hum of the ship's environmental systems. Cade, Mira, and Elias gathered around a table. The recent council session had left them with a dilemma. How much of the truth about their discovery should be shared with the galaxy? "Everything is riding on this decision," Mira said, her voice breaking the silence. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "We need to consider the potential fallout. What if revealing everything causes widespread panic or even civil unrest?" Elias rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. "But hiding the full truth means we're denying the galaxy a chance to prepare for possible dangers. If we don't tell them about the possible threats that ancient humans might have faced, we could be putting everyone at risk." Cade's gaze was fixed on a data pad displaying the translations of the ancient texts. "We've seen how divided the council was after our initial presentation. The truth could cause a rift between species. We need to weigh our next move carefully. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A junior scholar, anxious and visibly nervous, stepped into the room. "Excuse me, scholars. The council has requested a follow-up briefing. They are eager for clarification on the matters discussed." "Thank you," Cade said, standing up. He turned to Mira and Elias. "We have a decision to make before we go. Let's lay everything out clearly." The team sat back down, the room filled with an uneasy quiet. Mira took a deep breath and began. "First, we have to consider the ethical implications. We've uncovered evidence that suggests humans had a powerful enemy, one they fought desperately to avoid extinction. If we reveal this, we could spark fear and instability." Elias nodded, though his expression was troubled. "Yes, but if we don't disclose this information, it might undermine our credibility. The galaxy deserves to know the full extent of what we've found. It's a matter of integrity." Cade leaned forward, his face a mixture of concern and determination. "Here's the crux of the issue. If the ancient humans faced a threat that still exists, our silence could be seen as negligence. But if the truth causes chaos, we might be indirectly creating a new problem. We need to find a balance." Mira looked at Cade, a frown etched on her face. "So, what do you suggest?" Cade paused, considering the weight of their responsibility. "We need to be strategic about what we reveal. We can share the discovery about the common ancestry, but we should withhold details about the potential threats until we have more information. This way, we avoid unnecessary panic and still provide enough of the truth to prepare for future developments." Elias raised an eyebrow, clearly conflicted. "But if we withhold information about the potential threats, isn't that a form of deception? We could be risking the safety of countless lives." Cade's gaze was firm. "It's not deception, it's prudence. We don't have enough data to confirm the nature or existence of the threats yet. Until we do, it's our responsibility to prevent misinformation and maintain stability." Mira sighed, clearly weighing the options. "All right, let's go with that. We present the truth about our shared origins and emphasize the need for further research. We'll hold off on discussing the possible threats until we have concrete evidence." The team nodded in agreement, their faces showing the strain of their decision. They knew they were walking a fine line between honesty and responsibility, but they also understood the necessity of their choice. As they made their way to the council chamber, each step felt heavier than the last. The weight of their decision pressed down on them, knowing that their next actions could determine the future of the galaxy. The council chamber was buzzing with activity when they arrived. The representatives had gathered, their faces reflecting a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Cade, Mira, and Elias took their places at the front, preparing to address the assembly once more. The council leader stood, calling the room to order. "Scholars, we appreciate your prompt return. We await your updated report on your recent findings." Cade stepped forward, projecting calm despite the turmoil within. "Esteemed council members, we have reviewed our findings thoroughly and reached a decision on what to disclose." He glanced at Mira and Elias before continuing. "We will confirm the discovery of a shared origin among all known species. This new understanding will allow us to approach our past with a greater sense of unity and shared heritage." A representative from the Viridian Coalition raised a hand. "And what about the potential threats you mentioned previously? Will we not hear about those?" Cade took a deep breath. "While we have identified the ancient humans as a common ancestor, the full scope of their history, including any potential threats they faced, remains incomplete. We believe it is premature to discuss these aspects until we have more conclusive evidence. Our priority is to ensure stability and prevent undue panic." A murmur of agreement and dissent rippled through the chamber. Some representatives nodded in understanding, while others voiced their dissatisfaction. The council leader turned to the scholars, her expression serious. "Your approach has been noted. We will deliberate on how to proceed with this information. Thank you for your candor and for prioritizing the well-being of the galaxy." The team bowed respectfully and left the chamber, the weight of their decision still heavy on their shoulders. As they walked down the hall, their earlier resolve was tempered by the reality of their choice. Elias spoke first, his voice subdued. "I hope we made the right call. The galaxy deserves to know the truth, but it's a delicate balance." Mira nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We did what we could. Now, we need to hope that the Council uses this information wisely and that the galaxy can handle the changes ahead." Cade looked at his colleagues, a sense of weary determination in his eyes. "We've done our part. The rest is up to them. But whatever happens, we have to remain vigilant. The journey isn't over, and our responsibilities are far from finished." The corridors of the research vessel were eerily quiet as Cade, Mira, and Elias sat in their conference room, the air thick with tension. The weight of their decision pressed down on them like a physical force, every breath feeling labored. The flickering lights and soft hum of the ship's systems seemed almost intrusive against the backdrop of their deliberation. Cade leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "We've been through countless scenarios, but this feels different. We're not just making a decision for ourselves anymore. This is about the entire galaxy." Mira, her fingers drumming nervously on the tabletop, glanced at the data pad containing their findings. "It's one thing to discover a truth, but another to decide how to present it. We've seen how the Council reacted. Some were outraged, others were eager to embrace it. If we tell them everything, we risk causing widespread chaos." Elias stared at the table, his eyes distant. "I can't shake the feeling that we're on the verge of something monumental. If we reveal the full extent of what we've found, it could shatter the very fabric of galactic society. But if we withhold information, we're failing in our duty to inform and protect." Mira's voice was steady but filled with concern. "We need to think about the repercussions. The ancient texts hint at a powerful enemy. If we tell the galaxy about this, it might cause a panic. People might start looking for threats where there are none. But if we don't, are we setting ourselves up for a catastrophe we're not prepared for?" Elias nodded, his face etched with a mix of frustration and resolve. "We've already seen the fractures forming within the Council. This knowledge is too significant to ignore, yet too volatile to handle carelessly. Our decision will set a precedent." Cade tapped a finger against the data pad. "We've pieced together that ancient humans were an advanced species who seeded their DNA across the galaxy. But we don't have concrete evidence of the threats they faced or why they fell. Until we have more, is it responsible to reveal everything?" A sudden knock on the door interrupted their conversation. The junior scholar from earlier entered, his expression unreadable. "Scholars, the Council has requested that you provide a preliminary report on the ethics of disclosure. They are eager to understand your stance before making any further decisions." Cade looked at Mira and Elias, who nodded in agreement. They knew the time for debate was running out. As they prepared to meet with the Council, each felt the weight of their responsibility pressing down even more heavily. The Council chamber was a vast hall of glass and metal, with representatives from various species seated in a semicircle. The room buzzed with whispers, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. The scholars approached the front of the room, their faces a mix of determination and apprehension. The Council leader, a tall figure with a regal bearing, called the room to order. "Scholars, we await your update on the ethical considerations surrounding your recent findings. What is your position on what should be disclosed to the galaxy?" Cade stepped forward, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Esteemed Council members, our investigation into the ancient texts and DNA samples has led us to a profound and complex understanding. We have discovered that all known species share a common ancestry with an ancient, highly advanced species." A murmur of surprise and curiosity rippled through the chamber. The Council leader raised a hand for silence. "And what are the implications of this revelation?" Mira took over, her voice steady but carrying an edge of urgency. "The implications are vast. The knowledge that all species evolved from this ancient species could foster unity and a renewed sense of shared heritage. However, the text also suggests that ancient humans faced a formidable threat, the nature of which remains uncertain. A representative from the Illyrians, known for their deep philosophical views, spoke up. And what about the potential threats? Are you suggesting that we might face dangers similar to those that led to the downfall of the ancient humans? Elias addressed the question, his voice filled with a blend of caution and gravity. We have identified hints of a possible threat, but our current data is incomplete. Revealing this information without full evidence could lead to unnecessary fear and destabilization. Therefore, we recommend disclosing the truth about our shared ancestry, but withholding details about potential threats until we have more conclusive evidence. A representative from the Terrai Alliance, known for their emphasis on transparency, raised their voice. Is this not a form of withholding information? By not disclosing everything, are you not denying us the full scope of the truth? Cade met the representative's gaze with a firm expression. Our intent is not to deceive but to protect. We believe that revealing partial information will prevent widespread panic while still acknowledging our shared origins. This approach allows us to prepare for future developments responsibly. The council leader nodded, considering their words. Your approach is noted. We will deliberate on your recommendations. In the meantime, how do you propose we handle the growing unrest among our populations? Mira replied, her voice carrying a tone of hope. We suggest initiating a series of educational programs and open forums to discuss the new findings. This will help in fostering understanding and unity, while also preparing for the broader implications of our discovery. The council leader looked at the scholars with a contemplative expression. Your recommendations are reasonable. We will take them into consideration as we decide on the next steps. Thank you for your thorough and measured approach. The scholars bowed respectfully and exited the chamber, their faces reflecting the strain of their decision. As they walked down the corridor, their silence was heavy with the weight of their choice. Elias finally spoke, his voice tinged with frustration. I hope we've done the right thing. The balance between truth and stability is delicate, and our decision might have far-reaching consequences. Mira nodded, her expression thoughtful. We've made a choice based on what we know. Now, we have to trust that the Council will act wisely and that the galaxy will handle this information with the maturity it requires. The initial calm that followed the scholars' decision to partially disclose their findings was short-lived. As the new information filtered through various channels, the galaxy began to react with a mixture of disbelief, fear, and curiosity. The stability that had seemed so assured was rapidly unraveling as species and governments struggled to come to terms with the implications of their shared ancestry with humans. In the days following the Council's announcement, tensions flared across the galaxy. Governments, scientists, and citizens all grappled with the unsettling truth. The once abstract notion of a common ancestry had become a concrete reality that threatened to disrupt the status quo. On the home planet of the Terrai Alliance, a vast assembly of representatives gathered in their grand hall. The room was filled with an atmosphere of intense debate. The Terrai, known for their emphasis on transparency and rationality, were grappling with the Council's decision to reveal only part of the truth. The partial disclosure is a betrayal, argued Sarn, a senior Terrai representative. His voice echoed through the hall, filled with both anger and frustration. We were promised full transparency. Now, we are left with only pieces of the puzzle. Tara, another representative, countered with a measured tone. The scholars had their reasons. They aimed to prevent chaos. But we must now address the unrest among our people and manage the fallout from this revelation. The reaction on the home planet of the Iridians was markedly different. Known for their deep faith in cosmic balance and destiny, the Iridians were struck by a profound existential crisis. Their planet's grand temples, usually places of quiet reflection, were now buzzing with anxious discussions. High Priest Arian, a respected figure among the Iridians, addressed a gathering of clergy and scholars in a towering temple adorned with intricate cosmic symbols. This revelation challenges the very foundation of our beliefs, he said, his voice resonating with solemnity. Our scriptures speak of our origins as divine and eternal, yet we now face the reality that our ancestors were not unique, but part of a larger cosmic narrative. In the shadow of the temple, a young Iridian scholar named Lyra spoke quietly with her mentor. How can we reconcile our teachings with this new information? Are we to abandon our beliefs or adapt them to fit this new reality? Arian's gaze softened as he replied, "It is not a matter of abandoning beliefs, but understanding them in a new context. Our duty is to seek harmony between the old and the new, to find a path that honors our past while embracing the truth." On the planet of the Illyrians, known for their philosophical depth and introspection, the discovery sparked intense debate among their academic and political leaders. The Grand Hall of the Illyrian Institute was filled with the hum of conversation as scholars and politicians gathered to discuss the implications of their shared ancestry with humans. Professor Selene, a leading thinker among the Illyrians, stood at the center of the discussion. This knowledge could be a bridge to unity, she argued. Understanding our origins could foster collaboration and mutual respect among species. However, Councillor Darren, a prominent political figure, raised his voice in concern. Or it could lead to an identity crisis. The revelation challenges long-held beliefs and could destabilize our society. Selene nodded thoughtfully. Yes, but it is also an opportunity to redefine our place in the cosmos. We must approach this challenge with open minds and hearts, seeking ways to integrate this truth into our understanding of the universe. Amidst the public debates and discussions, there were also quieter, more secretive responses to the revelation. Various factions and governments, wary of the potential for panic and disorder, began to prepare their own contingency plans. In a secluded research facility on the edge of the Orion cluster, a group of shadowy figures convened in a dimly lit room. Their faces were obscured by masks, their identities hidden from view. The room was filled with holographic projections of star maps and data streams, reflecting the gravity of their meeting. One figure, a high-ranking official known only as the director, addressed the group. The council's decision to withhold certain information was a prudent one. However, we must prepare for potential fallout. The knowledge of our shared origins could lead to unrest among the populace. We need to ensure that we have strategies in place to manage any potential crisis. Another figure, a scientist with a somber expression, added, "We must also investigate further. The ancient text hinted at dangers associated with the downfall of the human civilization. If these threats are real, we need to be prepared." The director nodded. "Agreed. Our priority is to maintain stability while uncovering the full extent of the truth. The galaxy's reaction is unpredictable, but we must be ready for all possibilities." Back on the research vessel, the scholars gathered for one final meeting to reflect on the unfolding events. The gravity of their decision weighed heavily on them as they reviewed reports of the galaxy's reactions and prepared for their next steps. Cade looked around the room, his face marked by exhaustion and determination. "We've seen how different species are reacting to this revelation. Some are seeking unity, others are struggling with their identity, and some are preparing for possible crises. It's clear that our decision has set off a chain reaction that we can't fully control." Mira, her expression thoughtful, nodded. "Our goal was to provide a foundation for understanding, but the path forward is complex. We need to remain engaged with the galaxy's response and offer support where we can." Elias, who had been reviewing data on his tablet, spoke up. "The key now is to navigate these reactions with care. We must be prepared for both cooperation and conflict. The galaxy's future depends on how we handle this transition." The team exchanged determined glances, understanding the gravity of their situation. Their discovery had irrevocably altered the course of galactic history, and the coming days would test their ability to guide and support a galaxy in turmoil. As they stepped out into the ship's observation deck, the view of the stars stretched out before them, a reminder of the vastness and complexity of the universe. They were at the forefront of a new era, one marked by both opportunity and challenge. Their role as scholars had evolved into that of guides and leaders, tasked with helping the galaxy navigate through this transformative period. The revelation of humanity's ancient legacy had rippled through the galaxy, leaving no civilization untouched. As the weeks turned into months, the scholars found themselves at the heart of a growing movement. The galaxy's diverse species were slowly coming to terms with the fact that their origins were intertwined with humanity's, and this realization had sparked a call for unity among some of the more forward-thinking civilizations. The Galactic Council, recognizing the gravity of the situation, convened a summit on the planet Arvindor, a neutral world known for its lush landscapes and serene atmosphere. The summit was to be a gathering of leaders, scholars, and influential figures from across the galaxy, each representing their homeworlds and their people's interests. The goal was to discuss the implications of the shared human ancestry and to explore the possibility of forging a new era of cooperation and understanding. Cade, Mira, Elias, and the rest of the team arrived on Arvindor amidst a flurry of diplomatic activity. The planet's capital city, Astralin, was a bustling hub of commerce and culture, its towering spires and verdant parks reflecting the harmony that had long characterized Arvindor's society. As the scholars stepped off their transport, they were greeted by the sight of representatives from dozens of species, each displaying their unique cultural symbols and attire. The main venue for the summit was the Celestial Forum, a vast structure made of gleaming white stone and glass. Its design was a marvel of architecture, with sweeping arches and intricate carvings that depicted scenes of unity and peace from across the galaxy's history. Inside, the forum was a grand amphitheater, with tiered seating arranged in a circular fashion around a central stage. The seating arrangement symbolized the equality of all participants, a deliberate choice by the summit's organizers. As the scholars took their seats among the other delegates, they couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the gathering. Never before had so many of the galaxy's civilizations come together in one place, and the air was thick with anticipation. The summit's opening ceremony began with a speech from Arvindor's chancellor, a wise and eloquent leader named Lysara. "Today, we stand at the dawn of a new era," Lysara began, her voice resonating through the amphitheater. "The discovery of our shared origins with humanity has shaken us to our core, but it has also presented us with an unprecedented opportunity. We have the chance to transcend the divisions that have long separated us and to build a future founded on mutual respect and cooperation. Let us embrace this moment and work together to create a galaxy where all beings can thrive." Her words were met with a mixture of applause and murmurs. The scholars exchanged glances, each of them reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. Cade leaned over to Mira, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is bigger than we ever imagined. I never thought we'd be part of something like this." Mira nodded, her eyes scanning the diverse faces in the crowd. "It's a rare moment in history, Cade, but it's also a fragile one. There's so much at stake, and not everyone will see things the same way." The opening ceremony continued with speeches from other leaders and representatives, each expressing their hopes and concerns for the future. As the day wore on, it became clear that while there was a strong desire for unity, there were also deep-seated fears and doubts that could not be ignored. The next day, the real work of the summit began. Delegates broke into smaller discussion groups, each focused on a specific aspect of the proposed galactic unity. These groups tackled a range of issues, from trade and diplomacy to scientific cooperation and cultural exchange. The scholars found themselves pulled into several of these discussions, their expertise and first-hand experience with the ancient human records making them invaluable contributors. One of the most contentious issues was the question of governance. With so many species and cultures represented, finding a common ground for decision-making was proving to be a formidable challenge. In one of the discussion rooms, a heated debate was underway between representatives from the Viren Coalition and the Morth Dominion, two of the galaxy's most powerful factions. "The Viren Coalition will not submit to any form of centralized governance," declared Jaxar, the Viren representative, his voice firm and uncompromising. "Our people value their independence above all else. We will not allow our sovereignty to be undermined by an overreaching council." Across the table, Alia, the Morth delegate, responded with equal fervor. And what of the greater good? This is not just about your coalition, Jaxar. We're talking about the future of the entire galaxy. A unified governance structure is necessary to ensure peace and stability. Without it, we'll be doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. The room buzzed with tension as other delegates weighed in, each offering their perspectives. Cade, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. We need to find a balance between autonomy and unity. No one wants to see their people's interests trampled, but we also can't ignore the benefits of a more coordinated approach. Perhaps a system that allows for regional autonomy, while still maintaining a central council for broader issues, could be a solution. His suggestions sparked a flurry of discussion, with some delegates nodding in agreement while others remained skeptical. The debate continued for hours, with no clear consensus emerging. By the end of the day, it was clear that the issue of governance would be one of the most difficult to resolve. Meanwhile, in another part of the forum, Mara and Elias were engaged in a discussion about the ethical implications of genetic research. The revelation of humanity's widespread genetic influence had opened the door to a host of new scientific inquiries, but it had also raised serious ethical concerns. There are those who believe that we should explore the full potential of this genetic connection, said Dr. Vera, a renowned geneticist from the Zenori Republic. Imagine the advancements we could make in medicine, technology, and even lifespan. We could unlock abilities and traits that have been dormant for millennia. Elias, however, was more cautious. But at what cost? We're talking about manipulating the very essence of life. There are risks involved that we can't even begin to predict. And what happens if this knowledge falls into the wrong hands? We could be opening a Pandora's box that we won't be able to close. The discussion grew more intense as others joined in, each bringing their own expertise and concerns to the table. The ethical debate mirrored the broader challenges of the summit, finding a path forward that balanced the pursuit of knowledge and progress with the need for caution and responsibility. As the day came to a close, the scholars reconvened to share their experiences and reflections. They were exhausted, both mentally and physically, but they knew that their work was far from over. The summit had revealed the depth of the challenges they faced, but it had also shown the potential for cooperation and understanding. We've seen the best and worst of what this galaxy has to offer, Cade remarked as they gathered in their quarters. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty, but there's also hope. We just have to keep pushing forward, one step at a time. As the summit continued, the scholars found themselves not only grappling with the galaxy's challenges, but also facing their own personal struggles. The weight of their responsibility, combined with the intense scrutiny and pressure from the galactic community, was taking its toll on each of them in different ways. Cade, who had always been the steady leader of the group, began to feel the strain more acutely. The endless meetings, debates, and negotiations were wearing him down, and he found it increasingly difficult to maintain his composure. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he retreated to a quiet corner of the Celestial Forum's gardens, seeking solace in the tranquility of nature. As he sat beneath a towering tree, his thoughts turned inward. He couldn't help but question whether they had made the right decision in partially revealing the truth. The discord and uncertainty that had followed were not what he had envisioned, and he wondered if they had unleashed something they couldn't control. Mira found him there, her presence a comforting reminder of the bond they shared. She sat down beside him, her expression softening as she saw the weariness in his eyes. "You don't have to carry this burden alone, Cade," she said gently. "We're all in this together." Cade sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but sometimes it feels like the weight of the galaxy is on my shoulders. I keep thinking about what might happen if we can't find a way to bring everyone together. What if we've made a mistake?" Mira placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him in the moment. "You've always been the one to see the bigger picture, to think ahead. But we're in uncharted territory, and no one has all the answers. All we can do is our best, and trust that we're making the right choices." Elias, on the other hand, was grappling with a different kind of struggle. The ethical debates at the summit had stirred up memories of his past, particularly his work on a controversial genetic research project years ago. The project had been abandoned after it became clear that the risks outweighed the potential benefits, but the experience had left a lasting impact on him. The discussions at the summit had reopened old wounds, and Elias found himself questioning his own role in the current situation. Was he, too, treading a dangerous path by delving into the mysteries of humanity's genetic legacy? The thought gnawed at him, and he began to withdraw from the group, spending more time alone in his quarters. One evening, Mira noticed his absence and went to check on him. She found him poring over ancient text and data files, his face etched with worry. "Elias, what's going on? You've been distant lately." Elias looked up, his eyes troubled. "I've been thinking about the implications of what we've discovered. The genetic connection between humans and other species. It's more than just a scientific curiosity. It has the potential to change everything we know about life in the galaxy. But I can't shake the feeling that we're playing with fire." Mira frowned, sensing the depth of his internal conflict. "You're one of the most brilliant minds I know, Elias. If anyone can navigate these complexities, it's you. But you don't have to do it alone. We're all here to support each other." Elias nodded, appreciating her words, but the uncertainty remained. He knew that they were on the brink of something monumental, but he also knew that the consequences could be far-reaching and unpredictable. Meanwhile, Kyra, the youngest member of the team, was struggling with feelings of inadequacy. Surrounded by seasoned scholars and diplomats, she often felt out of her depth at the summit. Her contributions were met with polite acknowledgement, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being taken seriously. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating session, Kyra found herself in the forum's library, seeking refuge among the countless volumes of knowledge. As she wandered through the aisles, she came across a holographic display of ancient human artifacts. The sight of these relics, so full of history and meaning, struck a chord within her. She lingered by the display, lost in thought, when she heard a voice behind her. "Fascinating, isn't it? These objects hold the stories of countless lives, each one a piece of a larger puzzle." Kyra turned to see Dr. Terk, a respected historian from the Etherian Empire. He was known for his extensive knowledge of ancient civilizations and had been one of the more open-minded voices at the summit. "Yes, they do," Kyra replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But sometimes I wonder if I'm really contributing to that puzzle, or if I'm just another piece that doesn't quite fit." Dr. Terk gave her a thoughtful look. "Every piece has its place, even if it's not immediately obvious. You have a unique perspective, Kyra, one that is just as valuable as anyone else's. Don't underestimate the impact you can have." His words resonated with Kyra, offering a glimmer of reassurance. She knew that she still had much to learn, but she also realized that she had a voice in this process, a voice that could make a difference. As the summit neared its conclusion, the scholars gathered one last time in the gardens of the Celestial Forum. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the landscape, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. It was a rare moment of peace amidst the chaos of the summit, and they took the opportunity to reflect on everything that had transpired. Cade, Mira, Elias, and Kyra sat together on a grassy hill, overlooking a tranquil pond. The atmosphere was contemplative, each of them lost in their own thoughts. "We've come a long way," Cade said finally, breaking the silence. "But there's still so much work to be done. The summit may be ending, but this is just the beginning of a much larger journey." Mira nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We've seen the best and worst of what the galaxy has to offer. It's clear that unity won't come easily, but it's also clear that there's a genuine desire for it among many of the delegates. That gives me hope." Elias, who had been quiet for much of the evening, spoke up. "Hope is important, but so is caution. We've opened a door that can never be closed, and we need to be mindful of the consequences. The path we choose now will shape the future for generations to come." Kyra, who had been listening intently, added her own thoughts. "I've learned so much during this summit, not just about the galaxy, but about myself. I may not have all the answers, but I know that I have a role to play in this. We all do. As the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Mira stood up and stretched. We should get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll be heading back to Earth. It's time to bring what we've learned back to the rest of humanity. The return journey to Earth began in silence, the weight of the summit's revelations pressing down on them. The team had boarded their ship, the Horizon, which now drifted through the vast expanse of space, leaving behind the enigmatic planet of Arvindor and heading toward the familiar blue orb of Earth. Cade sat in the cockpit, his hands steady on the controls. The stars outside seemed distant, almost indifferent to the concerns that occupied his mind. He had always known that the mission would be difficult, but the reality of it had struck him harder than he had anticipated. The summit had revealed the fractures in the galaxy's unity and the deep-seated fears that still lingered in the minds of its inhabitants. Mira was seated beside him, her eyes focused on the navigation console. The familiar patterns of hyperspace travel scrolled across the screen, but her mind was elsewhere. The memories of the summit, the faces of the delegates, and the heated discussions played in her thoughts. She wondered how they could turn the potential for unity into a reality when so much fear and distrust remained. In the ship's common area, Elias was deep in thought, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edges of a data tablet. The genetic research he had uncovered was more profound than he had ever imagined, and with it came a burden of responsibility. The knowledge that humanity shared a connection with ancient civilizations was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The potential for misuse was great, and the consequences of their actions could shape the future of the galaxy. Kyra was sitting across from Elias, her eyes scanning a holographic display of the summit's proceedings. She had spent the journey so far trying to absorb everything that had happened, replaying the events in her mind and analyzing her own contributions. The encouragement she had received from Dr. Terk had given her a newfound confidence, but the enormity of their mission still weighed heavily on her. As the horizon approached Earth, the familiar sight of the planet filled the viewport. The blue oceans, the green forests, and the swirling clouds were a stark contrast to the cold, dark void of space. It was a reminder of what they were fighting for, a reminder that despite the vastness of the galaxy, Earth was still their home. Cade initiated the landing sequence, and the ship descended through the atmosphere, the hum of the engines vibrating through the hull. The descent was smooth, and soon they were gliding over the continents, the sprawling cities below shining like beacons in the night. They touched down at a secure landing facility on the outskirts of New Geneva, the capital of the United Earth government. The team disembarked, the cool night air greeting them as they stepped onto the tarmac. The facility was quiet, the only sounds being the distant hum of machinery and the rustling of leaves in the wind. The government complex in New Geneva was a stark contrast to the serenity of the landing facility. The halls were bustling with activity, officials and aides moving with purpose as they carried out their duties. The team was escorted to a conference room where they would be debriefed by the United Earth government's highest-ranking officials. The room was spacious, with a large, oval-shaped table at its center. Holographic displays lined the walls, showing real-time updates on various operations and intelligence reports from across the galaxy. Cade, Mira, Elias, and Kyra took their seats, their expressions serious as they waited for the briefing to begin. Moments later, the door opened and several high-ranking officials entered the room, including Director Hargrave, the head of the United Earth Intelligence Agency. Hargrave was a man of few words, his demeanor stern and focused. He wasted no time in getting to the point. "Welcome back," Hargrave began, his voice even. "I trust your mission to Arvindor was productive." Cade nodded. It was, but it also raised more questions than it answered. The galaxy is more divided than we thought. The summit made that clear. Hargrave took a seat at the head of the table, his eyes narrowing slightly. That was to be expected. The galaxy has always been a patchwork of alliances and rivalries, but the information you've gathered is invaluable. The genetic connection you've uncovered could change everything. Elias leaned forward, his expression tense. The implications are profound, Director. We're dealing with a legacy that predates most known civilizations. If this knowledge were to fall into the wrong hands. Hargrave raised a hand to stop him. We're aware of the risks, Doctor. That's why we need to tread carefully. The United Earth government is committed to ensuring that this knowledge is used responsibly. But we need your expertise to help us navigate these uncharted waters. Mira spoke up, her tone measured. We understand the importance of this mission, Director, but we also need to be realistic about the challenges we're facing. The summit showed us that the galaxy is not ready for the kind of unity we're striving for. Fear and mistrust run deep. Hargrave nodded. That's precisely why your mission is so important. The galaxy may not be ready now, but we need to lay the groundwork for the future. The United Earth government is prepared to support you in whatever way we can, but we need you to lead the way. Cade exchanged a glance with Mira, then turned back to Hargrave. We're committed to this mission, Director, but we'll need full access to resources and intelligence. If we're going to succeed, we can't afford to be blindsided by anything. Hargrave considered this for a moment, then nodded. You'll have what you need, but remember, the galaxy is watching. We need to proceed with caution and diplomacy. The stakes are higher than ever. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as the team settled back into their roles on Earth. Cade and Mira spent their time reviewing intelligence reports and coordinating with other branches of the United Earth government. Elias dove back into his research, determined to unravel the mysteries of the ancient genetic legacy they had uncovered. Kyra, meanwhile, focused on analyzing the data from the summit, searching for any clues that might help them anticipate the next moves of their rivals. But as they worked, a new threat began to emerge, one that they had not anticipated. It started with subtle anomalies in the data streams, small discrepancies that seemed insignificant at first. But as Kyra dug deeper, she realized that these anomalies were not random. They were deliberate attempts to interfere with the government's communication networks. She immediately reported her findings to Cade and Mira, who convened an emergency meeting with the team. We've detected unauthorized access to our communication systems, Kyra explained, her voice steady but urgent. Someone is trying to intercept our data, and they're doing a good job of covering their tracks. Cade's expression darkened. Whoever it is, they're after our most sensitive information. We need to find out who's behind this and stop them before they can do any more damage. Mira nodded in agreement. We should start by tracing the source of the anomalies. If we can pinpoint where the breaches are coming from, we might be able to identify the culprits. Elias, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. This could be related to the summit. We made a lot of enemies. They're people who don't want to see us succeed. If they've already infiltrated our systems, we're dealing with a serious threat. The team quickly mobilized, using every resource at their disposal to track down the source of the breach. As they worked, it became clear that this was no ordinary hacking attempt. The intruders were highly skilled, and their methods were unlike anything the team had encountered before. Days turned into nights as the team worked tirelessly to counter the threat. The pressure was mounting, and the stakes were higher than ever. If they couldn't stop the intruders, everything they had worked for could be lost. The team had barely scratched the surface of the infiltration threat, and yet they were already dealing with more than they had anticipated. The intrusions into their communication systems were becoming increasingly sophisticated, each breach more elusive than the last. Whoever was behind this was playing a long game, one that could jeopardize not only their mission, but also the very security of Earth itself. Cade stood at the center of the command room, his gaze fixed on the holographic display that tracked the anomalies in their system. The glowing lines of data streams twisted and turned, each representing a potential lead or a dead end. The room was dimly lit, the hum of machines filling the silence as the team worked tirelessly to decode the encrypted messages that had been intercepted. Mira was at his side, her eyes sharp and focused. She had been leading the counterintelligence effort, coordinating with experts across multiple departments to trace the source of the breaches. Despite their efforts, the intruders remained frustratingly elusive. "We're dealing with someone who knows our systems inside and out," Mira said, her voice low but steady. "They're not just skilled, they're familiar with our protocols." Cade nodded, his mind racing through the possibilities. "This isn't just about information gathering. They're probing our defenses, looking for weaknesses. If we don't stop them soon, they'll find a way and that we can't counter." Elias, who had been working at a console nearby, looked up from his screen. "I've been analyzing the data from the breaches. There's a pattern here, but it's not what I expected. Whoever is behind this is using techniques that are old, really old. It's like they're pulling from archives that predate most of our current security systems." Kyra, who had been listening intently, frowned. "Old techniques? Could it be that they're trying to throw us off by using outdated methods? Or maybe they're trying to exploit something we've overlooked because it's so antiquated?" Elias shook his head. "It's more than that. These techniques are ancient, but they've been adapted for modern systems. It's almost as if someone is reviving lost knowledge that's been buried for centuries." Cade's eyes narrowed. Could this be connected to the genetic legacy we uncovered? If someone out there has access to ancient knowledge, they could be using it against us. We need to find out who's behind this, and fast. Mira glanced at Cade, her expression serious. "We should consider the possibility that this isn't just one entity. What if we're dealing with a network and alliance of sorts, using different methods to achieve a common goal?" Cade's jaw tightened. The thought of a coordinated effort against them was unsettling, but it made sense. The summit had revealed just how divided the galaxy was, and it wasn't hard to imagine that there were factions out there that wanted to see them fail. "We need to widen our scope. Start looking for any signs of collaboration between hostile groups. If they're working together, we need to know how and why." Kyra nodded, already pulling up data from recent intelligence reports. "I'll start cross-referencing known factions and their activities. If there's a connection, we'll find it." As the team delved deeper into their investigation, the hours began to blur together. The constant pressure weighed on them, but they pushed through, knowing that time was not on their side. Each new discovery led to more questions, each lead another piece of a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex by the minute. In the midst of their work, a sudden alert flashed across the central display. The team's eyes snapped to the screen as a new breach was detected, this one different from the others. The lines of code were erratic, almost as if they were being manipulated in real time. Mira's fingers flew across the console as she tried to isolate the breach. "This one's different, it's not just a probe. They're trying to inject something into our system." Elias quickly joined her, his eyes scanning the data. "It's a worm. If it gets in, it could compromise everything. We need to isolate it, now." Cade's voice was firm. "Shut down the affected sectors. We can't let it spread." Kyra was already on it, her hands moving swiftly over the controls. "I'm rerouting power to the firewall. It should buy us some time." But even as they worked to contain the threat, the worm continued to evolve, adapting to their defenses with alarming speed. It was clear that they were up against something far more advanced than anything they had encountered before. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the worm vanished. The breach was sealed, but the damage had already been done. The team stared at the screen in disbelief as the realization set in. "They weren't trying to take control," Elias murmured, his voice laced with dread. "They were gathering data. They've been watching us this whole time." Mira's expression hardened. "This was just the beginning. They've tested our defenses, and now they know exactly how to get past them." Cade clenched his fists, a cold determination settling over him. "We need to go on the offensive. We can't just sit back and wait for them to strike again. We need to find them and take them down." The team's resolve hardened as they realized the gravity of the situation. The breaches were no longer just a threat to their mission, they were a direct attack on the security of Earth and its allies. The time for defensive measures was over. They needed to strike back, and they needed to do it swiftly. Cade convened a meeting in the command center, gathering the best minds from across the United Earth government's intelligence and cybersecurity divisions. The room was filled with a tense energy, the gravity of their mission weighing heavily on everyone present. Cade stood at the head of the room, his gaze sweeping over the assembled officers and specialists. "We're dealing with a coordinated attack on our systems. Our adversary is skilled, well-funded, and highly motivated. They've already breached our defenses multiple times, and they've been gathering data on our operations. This is not just a cyber threat, it's an act of war." The room was silent as the weight of Cade's words sank in. The implications were clear. They were facing an enemy that was not only capable of infiltrating their most secure systems, but also brazen enough to do so repeatedly. Mira stepped forward, her voice clear and authoritative. "We've identified a pattern in the breaches, an ancient technique that's been adapted for modern systems. We believe our adversary is using knowledge that predates most known civilizations, possibly linked to the genetic legacy we uncovered. This makes them incredibly dangerous, but it also gives us a clue to their identity." Elias tapped a few commands into his console, bringing up a holographic map of the galaxy. Several points were highlighted, representing known locations of interest. "We've traced some of the data streams to these locations. They're remote, mostly uninhabited planets, but there's evidence of recent activity. We believe these are staging grounds for the attacks." Kyra added, "We've also detected increased chatter among certain factions that were present at the summit. It's possible they're working together, pooling their resources to mount this offensive. We need to investigate these leads and find out who's behind this." Cade nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. "We'll divide into teams. One team will focus on tracking the origin of the breaches and gathering intel on the factions involved. The other will work on fortifying our defenses and preparing for a potential counterattack. We need to move quickly, time is not on our side." The room erupted into activity as the teams were formed and assignments were given. Cade, Mira, Elias, and Kyra would lead the primary investigation, while the rest of the team would work on shoring up their defenses and monitoring for any further breaches. As they prepared to depart, Cade pulled Mira aside. "We're walking into unknown territory here. If this is connected to the ancient legacy, we need to be prepared for anything. Make sure the team is ready." Mira met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll be ready. Whatever's out there, we'll face it together." With their plan in place, the team set off on their mission. The journey took them to the far reaches of the galaxy, to planets that had long been forgotten by most civilizations. The landscapes were desolate, the remnants of ancient structures half buried in sand and dust. But despite the barren surroundings, there were signs of recent activity, footprints in the dust, discarded equipment, and faint energy signatures that indicated the presence of advanced technology. As they investigated each site, the team gathered more evidence of the enemy's operations. The pattern became clearer. Someone was using these remote locations as staging grounds for their attacks, hiding their movements in the vast expanse of the galaxy. But who and why remained a mystery. At one site, they discovered a piece of ancient technology, partially buried in the sand. It was unlike anything they had seen before, an intricate device made of materials that defied analysis, with markings that hinted at a language long forgotten. Elias examined the device, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is incredible. The design is so advanced, yet it's clearly ancient. If we can figure out how it works, it might give us an edge." Cade nodded. "Bring it back to the ship. We'll analyze it further once we're in a secure location. It could be the key to understanding who we're up against." As they continued their investigation, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The ancient technology, the remote locations, the coordinated attacks, it all pointed to a powerful and organized enemy, one with knowledge that spanned millennia. But just as they were beginning to make progress, a new threat emerged. The enemy had anticipated their moves and set a trap. As the team prepared to depart from one of the remote planets, they were ambushed by a group of heavily armed mercenaries. The firefight was intense, the team caught off guard by the sudden attack. They fought back with everything they had, but the mercenaries were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. It quickly became clear that this was no ordinary group of soldiers. They were highly trained, their tactics precise and ruthless. Cade took cover behind a rocky outcrop, his pulse pounding in his ears. He could see Mira and Kyra fighting nearby, their movements fluid and controlled as they took down the attackers one by one. Elias was at the rear, providing cover fire with a sniper rifle, his shots taking out key targets with deadly accuracy. But despite their efforts, the enemy was closing in. They needed to regroup and find a way out before they were overwhelmed. "Fall back to the ship," Cade shouted, his voice barely audible over the sounds of battle. "We can't hold this position." The team began to retreat, moving quickly but carefully as they made their way back to the ship. The mercenaries pursued them, firing relentlessly as they advanced. It was a desperate race against time, every second bringing them closer to being surrounded. Just as they reached the ship, a heavy blast rocked the ground beneath them. Cade turned to see a mercenary with a rocket launcher taking aim, the weapon locked onto their ship. "Get inside, now," Cade yelled, pushing the others ahead of him as they scrambled up the ramp. The rocket streaked through the air, slamming into the ground just meters from the ship. The explosion sent a shockwave through the area, the force of the blast nearly knocking Cade off his feet. But they made it inside, the ship's doors sealing shut just in time. "Get us out of here," Cade shouted to the pilot as he strapped himself into his seat. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting off the ground just as the mercenaries closed in. The team barely had time to catch their breath as the ship shot into the sky, leaving the battle behind. But even as they escaped, the reality of their situation was clear. They had underestimated their enemy, and now they were paying the price. Back on the ship, the atmosphere was tense. The team had narrowly escaped with their lives, but the encounter had left them shaken. They had known they were up against a formidable enemy, but the ambush had shown just how dangerous their adversaries truly were. Cade sat in the command center, reviewing the footage from the battle. The mercenaries had been highly organized, their tactics suggesting they were well-funded and experienced. This was no random attack, it had been a calculated move to take them out before they could gather more intel. Mira entered the room, her expression grim. "We lost some good people back there. We can't afford to make any more mistakes." Cade nodded, his jaw clenched. "We need to regroup and reassess our strategy. We can't let them catch us off guard again." Elias joined them, carrying the ancient device they had recovered. "I've been analyzing the technology we found. It's more advanced than anything we've seen, but it's also incredibly old. I'm still working on deciphering the markings, but it's possible this device is connected to the breaches in our system." Kyra entered, her face showing signs of exhaustion, but also determination. "The mercenaries weren't just after us, they were after this device. They must know something we don't." Cade frowned, considering their options. "We need to find out who hired those mercenaries and why they're so interested in this technology. If it's as important as we think, it could be the key to understanding our enemy's plans." Mira nodded in agreement. "We also need to figure out how they knew where we were. There's a leak somewhere, either in our team or in our communications. Until we find it, we're vulnerable." Cade leaned back in his chair, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. They were up against a powerful and well-organized enemy, one that seemed to be always one step ahead. But he knew they couldn't back down. They had come too far, and the stakes were too high. "We'll find them," Cade said firmly. "We'll figure out who's behind this, and we'll stop them. But we need to be smarter, more cautious. No more mistakes." The team nodded, the determination in their eyes matching Cade's. Elias continued his analysis of the ancient device. The markings were complex, filled with symbols that defied easy interpretation. But as he worked, a pattern began to emerge, a series of interconnected symbols that seemed to reference a location. Elias's eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. "I think I've found something," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "These symbols, they're pointing to a specific place. If we can decode the rest, we might be able to find out where our enemy is operating from. Cade and Mira exchanged a look, their spirits lifting slightly at the news. It was a small breakthrough, but it was something they could use to strike back. "Keep working on it," Cade said, a renewed sense of purpose in his voice. "We need to find out everything we can about this location. If it's where they're hiding, we're going to bring the fight to them." The atmosphere in the ship shifted. The fear and uncertainty that had hung over them since the ambush began to dissipate, replaced by a steely resolve. They had been knocked down, but they weren't out. They had a lead, and they were going to follow it no matter where it took them. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as the team prepared for their next mission. They had decoded enough of the ancient device to pinpoint a location, a remote, uncharted planet on the outskirts of the galaxy. It was a place shrouded in mystery, with no known settlements or recorded history. It was the perfect hiding spot for an enemy operating in the shadows. Cade called the team together for a final briefing before they set out. The room was filled with a quiet tension, the weight of the upcoming mission heavy in the air. "This is it," Cade began, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've traced the breaches and the mercenaries back to this location. If our intel is correct, this is where our enemy is operating from. We're going in with everything we've got, but we need to be prepared for anything." Mira spoke next, her eyes scanning the faces of her team. "We've learned a lot from our previous encounters. They're organized, they're dangerous, and they're not afraid to fight dirty. But we've also learned their tactics, and we know what to expect. This time, we're going to be ready." Elias stepped forward, holding up a small device. "I've modified the ancient technology we recovered. It's been adapted to work with our systems, and it should give us an edge in countering their attacks. But it's still experimental, so use it with caution." Kyra added, "We're not just going in to take them out, we're going in to gather as much intel as possible. We need to know who they are, what they want, and how we can stop them for good." Cade looked around the room, his gaze meeting each of his team members. "We've been through a lot together, and I know this mission is risky, but I believe in each and every one of you. We're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for Earth, for our future, and for everyone who's counting on us. Let's make sure we bring them back something to be proud of." The atmosphere in the ship grew even more charged. The planet loomed large on the view screen, its surface covered in thick clouds that obscured any details. It was an ominous sight, but the team was undeterred. "Prepare for landing," Cade ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. The ship descended through the clouds, the atmosphere growing darker as they neared the surface. The landing was rough, the ship jolting as it touched down on the uneven terrain. Cade unbuckled his harness and stood up, his expression grim. "Let's move out. Stay sharp and stick together. We don't know what we're walking into." The team exited the ship, their boots sinking into the soft, alien soil. The air was thick and heavy, filled with the scent of something unfamiliar. The landscape was barren, with jagged rocks jutting out of the ground like teeth. There was no sign of life, but the team knew better than to let their guard down. They moved cautiously, their weapons at the ready, as they scanned the area for any signs of danger. The only sound was the crunch of their boots on the rocky ground and the occasional whisper of wind. They came across a series of caves carved into the mountainside as they ventured deeper into the planet's surface. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for one person to pass through at a time. "This is it," Cade said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where they're hiding." The team formed a single file line, each member checking their gear one last time before entering the cave. The darkness swallowed them as they moved deeper into the mountain, their flashlights cutting through the blackness. The cave was a labyrinth of tunnels, twisting and turning in every direction. It was easy to get lost, but the team had prepared for this. Elias had mapped out the cave system using the data from the ancient device, and he led the way with confidence. After what felt like hours of navigating the dark tunnels, they finally reached a large chamber at the heart of the mountain. The walls were covered in strange symbols, similar to those on the ancient device. In the center of the chamber stood a massive structure, its purpose unknown. Cade signaled for the team to spread out and search the area. As they moved closer to the structure, they could see that it was a machine of some kind, its surface covered in intricate designs and glowing faintly with an inner light. "This is it," Elias whispered, his eyes wide with awe. "This is what they've been hiding." Cade approached the machine, his hand hovering over the controls. "What do you think it does?" Elias shook his head. "I'm not sure, but it's definitely powerful. We need to be careful." As they examined the machine, the ground suddenly began to shake, the vibrations growing stronger with each passing second. "Get back," Cade shouted, but it was too late. The machine roared to life, its inner workings humming with energy. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, and the team was thrown back by the force of the explosion. The room was cloaked in shadows, save for the cool blue light emanating from the stasis chamber that held the last human. The scholars stood in a tense, expectant silence, their faces etched with a mixture of anxiety and determination. The moment had arrived, a moment that would define not only their fates, but that of the entire galaxy. Soren stepped forward, his voice carrying the gravity of their decision. "We've come to the edge of what we know," he said. "We must decide whether to awaken the last human and reveal the truth to the galaxy, or leave them in stasis, preserving the status quo." Galen, his face lined with age and worry, nodded solemnly. "The prophecy speaks of great upheaval, but it also speaks of transformation. We must consider the potential for both." Alara, usually brimming with curiosity, now seemed overwhelmed. "What if awakening them brings about chaos we can't control? What if the galaxy isn't ready for the truth?" "I've studied the data," Eric said, his voice firm but weary. "The probabilities are high that awakening the last human will lead to significant change, both positive and negative. But denying the galaxy the chance to evolve might be a greater risk." Elise, who had dedicated years to understanding the galaxy's history, added, "Our role has always been to guide, not to dictate. The choice to awaken the last human should be made with the understanding that we are offering the galaxy a chance to shape its own future." Soren took a deep breath, his eyes meeting each scholar's in turn. "We cannot make this decision alone. The galaxy must be given the opportunity to choose its own path." The scholars worked in unison to prepare the stasis chamber for activation. The hum of machinery filled the room as the chamber's systems powered up, the blue light intensifying. The chamber's lid began to retract, revealing the figure of the last human, still and lifeless. Minutes stretched into hours as the chamber completed its sequence. Finally, the lid opened fully, and the last human's eyes fluttered open. The scholars gathered around, their hearts racing as they awaited the human's reaction. The last human's eyes, though initially unfocused, gradually sharpened. They took in the room, their gaze moving slowly from one scholar to the next. There was an air of timelessness about them, a sense of being both ancient and new. "Welcome back," Soren said, his voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions within him. "You have been in stasis for a long time. The galaxy is in turmoil, and we believe that you have the potential to guide us through it." The last human's gaze settled on Soren, their expression inscrutable. "Why was I awakened?" Soren hesitated. "Because the galaxy is at a crossroads. There is a prophecy that speaks of you as a pivotal figure, one who could bring either salvation or destruction. We wanted you to decide." The last human studied the scholars, their eyes reflecting a deep, ancient knowledge. "The future is not predetermined," they said, their voice resonating with a calm authority. "It is shaped by the choices made by those who inhabit it. I can offer guidance, but the ultimate decision lies with you." The scholars exchanged looks of apprehension and determination. The last human had not given them a clear answer, but their words had opened the door to a multitude of possibilities. Soren turned to his colleagues, his mind racing. "We have the choice to reveal the truth to the galaxy or to keep it hidden. What do we do?" Alara, her earlier apprehension now replaced by a sense of purpose, spoke up. We must give the galaxy the chance to decide its own fate. We cannot keep the truth from them any longer." The other scholars nodded in agreement. They had prepared for this moment, but the reality of it was daunting. They had decided to reveal the truth, to awaken the last human, and let the galaxy confront its own future. With a series of commands, Soren activated the communication network, preparing to broadcast the revelation to the galaxy. The scholars watched in silence as the transmission began, their hearts heavy with the weight of their decision. As the broadcast began, the scholars could see the reactions across the galaxy. Some civilizations watched with shock and disbelief, others with hope and curiosity. The revelation was out, and the galaxy was faced with the truth about its origins and the potential for change. Hours passed, and the scholars continued to monitor the galaxy's response. The initial shock was giving way to a mix of emotions: fear, hope, and anticipation. The galaxy was on the brink of a new era, but the exact nature of that era was still unknown. Then, as the scholars prepared to wind down their operations, an urgent message arrived. It was from a previously unknown faction, a group claiming to have ancient knowledge that could either support or dismantle the prophecy. Their message was cryptic but clear. The truth is not what it seems. There are forces at play that have been hidden from you,